She wore a black dress to her sister's wedding. The groom fainted when he saw why. The spring of 1816 had been the season of Elena Ashford's greatest hopes and deepest destruction. At 23 years of age, she had not expected to capture the devotion of Lord Julian Thorne, the most sought-after bachelor in 3 counties. Yet he had courted her with such fervor, such passionate declarations beneath her mother's rose arbor, that she had dared to believe in fairy tales. Then her sister Clara had returned from finishing school in Bath. Within a fortnight, Elena had found them tangled in her own bed, her mother's antique jewelry box, the one thing she treasured above all else, already gone from her dressing table. Julian had looked at her with cold eyes and said, "I hold you in affection, but I have come to realize that my future requires a woman of greater practicality." The humiliation had burned through her like acid, but the theft had transformed her grief into something far more dangerous. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. Now, 6 months later, St. Augustine's Cathedral blazed with 1,000 candles for the wedding of Lord Julian Thorne and Miss Clara Ashford. The pews overflowed with London's finest families, their silks and jewels glittering in the golden light. The organ swelled with triumphant music as the priest stood ready at the altar, his prayer book open to the marriage rites. Julian stood tall in his military dress uniform, medals gleaming, his handsome face arranged in an expression of dignified satisfaction. Beside him, Clara practically glowed in her wedding gown of white silk and Belgian lace, her blonde curls crowned with orange blossoms, her smile sharp with victory. Then the cathedral doors exploded open with a boom that echoed like cannon fire. Every head turned. The organ choked into silence mid-note. Elena stood framed in the doorway like a specter summoned from the grave itself. Her mourning gown was a masterpiece of Gothic grandeur. Pitch-black silk overlaid with heavy lace that seemed to drink in the light, the bodice cut severely, the skirts so voluminous they whispered against the stone floor with each breath she took. A thick black veil cascaded from her head to her waist, obscuring her face completely. In her gloved hands, she carried not flowers but a single black fan, closed like a weapon. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Someone's hymnal clattered to the floor. At the altar, Clara's face twisted with rage, her knuckles white around her bouquet. Julian's tan complexion turned the color of old parchment. The priest's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Elena began to walk, not rushed, not hesitant. A slow, deliberate procession down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of a funeral dirge. She moved like death itself had taken human form and decided to attend a celebration, an omen wrapped in silk and shadow. The guests shrank back in their pews as she passed, as if darkness were contagious. With each step, the cathedral seemed to grow colder, the candlelight dimmer, until the only thing anyone could see was the woman in black, gliding toward the altar with terrible, patient inevitability. With each step down that endless aisle, Elena's mind drifted back 6 months, to the morning that had shattered her world into irreparable pieces. She could still see Julian's face above hers in the garden, his hand cradling her cheek as he swore eternal devotion. "You are my soul's companion, Elena. I shall love you until my last breath." The very next dawn, she had walked into her bedchamber to find him naked in her sheets with Clara, their bodies intertwined, their laughter dying on their lips as Elena stood frozen in the doorway. But worse than the betrayal of flesh had been the glint of gold in Julian's hand. Her mother's jewelry box, the one her dying mother had pressed into her trembling fingers with instructions to guard it with her life. "It is not what it seems," her mother had whispered. Promise me you will never let it fall into unworthy hands. Elena had promised, and Julian had stolen it while she slept. The present moment crashed back over her as frantic whispers erupted throughout the cathedral. Is that Elena Ashford? An elderly countess hissed to her companion. Dear God, why is she dressed like that? Is someone dead? Another voice gasped. The audacity! On her sister's wedding day. She must be mad with jealousy. This is a scandal. Someone should remove her. Elena continued walking, her pace never faltering. She passed the third row where the Ashford family sat, her father conspicuously absent, her distant aunt covering her face with a fan in mortification. As Elena drew level with the front pew, Clara's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She leaned forward, her voice a venomous hiss that cut through the murmurs. Go away, you miserable crow. You lost. He chose me, and there is nothing you can do about it. You are pathetic, clinging to your grief like a widow. Julian never loved you. He only tolerated you to get close to father's fortune. Elena's steps never paused. She didn't even turn her head. Clara's words were empty noise, the buzzing of an insect against glass. She had not come here to argue or to weep or to beg. She had come to deliver justice. The priest, a nervous man with watery eyes, clutched his prayer book with trembling hands. My lady, this is most irregular. The ceremony has already begun. His voice trailed off as Elena finally stopped, positioning herself directly beside the bride and groom at the altar steps. She stood perfectly still, a pillar of darkness against their pristine white finery. The contrast was obscene, as if someone had placed a tombstone in the center of a flower garden. Julian's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill that now permeated the cathedral. Clara's face had gone from flushed with anger to pale with uncertainty. The guests sat frozen, torn between fascination and horror. No one quite brave enough to intervene, but no one willing to look away from whatever catastrophe was about to unfold. The silence in the cathedral stretched like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. Elena remained motionless beside the couple, a dark monument to something the guests couldn't yet name. The priest looked desperately between the three figures before him, his hands shaking so badly the prayer book rattled. He cleared his throat twice before managing to speak. I suppose we might. Shall we continue? His voice cracked on the last word. No one answered. He swallowed hard and attempted to pick up where the ceremony had been interrupted, his words stumbling. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God. Elena moved. With deliberate slowness, she raised her gloved hands to the edges of her veil. The rustle of fabric seemed deafening in the hushed cathedral. She lifted the black lace away from her face and let it fall back over her shoulders. Another collective gasp swept through the congregation, but this time it carried a different quality. Not shock at her presence, but at her appearance. Elena was not weeping. Her face bore no marks of grief or rage or desperation. Her features were perfectly composed, almost serene, carved from porcelain and moonlight. Her dark eyes were clear, cold, and calculating as they fixed upon Julian with the intensity of a raptor sighting prey. Her lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. Not cruel, not mocking, but absolutely certain. She looked like a woman who held every card in a game her opponents didn't yet realize they were playing. Julian's reaction was immediate and visceral. All the blood drained from his face. His eyes went wide with an emotion that transcended mere embarrassment or social discomfort. This was fear, raw and primal. He took an involuntary step backward, bumping into the altar rail. His mouth worked silently for a moment before he managed to force out words, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena, please, don't make a scene. This is unseemly. I'll give you money, whatever you think you're owed. Name your price and we can settle this privately after. Elena's smile deepened by a fraction of an inch. She said nothing. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. And in that look was a promise that money could not buy his way out of whatever was coming. She had not come to negotiate. Clara found her voice, though it came out shrill and desperate rather than commanding. "Julian, don't speak to her. Guards, someone. Remove this woman. She is mad, clearly unhinged. This is my wedding day, and I will not have it ruined by a jealous spinster who cannot accept. Be silent." Elena's voice cut through Clara's tirade like a blade through silk. It was not loud, but it carried a weight of authority that made even the bride's mouth snap shut in shock. Elena didn't look at her sister. Her eyes remained locked on Julian, who now trembled visibly, his metals clinking softly against each other with each shuddering breath he took. The cathedral had gone so quiet that every person present could hear his breathing, fast and panicked, the sound of a cornered animal. The priest, desperate to regain some semblance of control over his own ceremony, cleared his throat with exaggerated force. His voice wavered as he rushed through the words, as if speed might somehow dispel the nightmare his wedding had become. "If any person here present knows of any lawful impediment to this marriage, let them speak now or forever." "I do not object to this marriage, Father." Elena's voice rang out clear and calm, echoing through the vaulted ceiling with perfect clarity. "Let them be wed by all means." The confusion that followed was almost comical. Julian's face, which had been twisted in terror, now showed bewilderment. Clara blinked rapidly, her bouquet drooping in her hands. The guests erupted in urgent whispers. If she didn't object, then why had she come? Why the black dress, the dramatic entrance, the positioning herself at the altar like a specter at the feast? The priest looked as though he might faint from relief or possibly from sheer confusion. Elena reached into the folds of her black gown, into a pocket cleverly concealed in the heavy skirts. The rustle of fabric silenced the murmurs instantly. Every eye fixed on her hand as it emerged holding a rolled parchment bound with ribbon. But this was no ordinary document. Even from a distance, the guests could see the crimson wax seal that gleamed in the candlelight, stamped with an unmistakable insignia that made several people gasp aloud. The royal seal, the personal mark of King George IV himself. Elena held the parchment aloft for a moment, letting its significance sink in. Then she turned to Julian with that same cold, certain smile. "I am not here to stop your wedding, Lord Thorne. I am merely here to deliver a wedding gift. From His Majesty the King." Julian's hand shook so violently when he reached for the document that he nearly dropped it. Clara leaned in, trying to read over his shoulder, her face eager, clearly assuming this was some sort of royal blessing, perhaps even a land grant or title. After all, Julian had told everyone that his connections at court were impeccable. This must be a reward, a recognition of his status, and the parchment unrolled. Julian's eyes scanned the formal script at the top. His face went from confused to horrified in the space of a single heartbeat. The document slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor at the altar steps where everyone in the front rows could see the elaborate calligraphy and official seals. It was not a gift. It was a warrant, an arrest warrant, and the charges listed in formal legal language made several ladies in the congregation cry out in shock. High treason, theft of crown property, crimes against the realm. Elena's voice rose above the gasps and exclamations, projecting to every corner of the cathedral with theatrical precision. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, and now her words came out crisp and inexorable. "Lords and ladies, honored guests, I apologize for this interruption to today's joyous festivities. But I'm afraid I must inform you all that Lord Julian Thorne is not the man you believe him to be. 6 months ago he stole from me. What he took was my late mother's jewelry box, a box I treasured beyond all things. But you see, those jewels were never truly mine to own." She paused, letting the silence build. Julian had retrieved the warrant from the floor with shaking hands and was reading it now, his lips moving soundlessly as his eyes tracked over words like treason and Tower of London, and hanged by the neck until dead. "The jewels Lord Thorne stole," Elena continued, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow felt more dangerous for its quietness, "were entrusted to my mother by Queen Charlotte herself, may she rest in peace. My mother was the Queen's personal confidant for 30 years. When the Queen lay dying, she gave my mother a collection of royal jewels, not as a gift, but as a sacred trust. They were to be kept safe, held in stewardship for the crown, until such time as the king required their return. My mother made me swear on her deathbed that I would guard them with my life. They were not mine to sell or give away. They belonged, and still belong, to the crown of England." The guests sat in stunned silence. Several of the older nobility were nodding slowly, recognition dawning on their faces. They remembered now the stories about the Queen's friendship with the late Lady Ashford, the whispers about a sacred trust, though the details had never been made public. Lord Thorne, in his infinite greed, Elena's voice took on an edge of contempt, broke into my private chambers, seduced my foolish sister, and stole what he believed to be a fortune in jewels that would solve his rather considerable gambling debts. What he actually stole was property of His Majesty King George IV. He has committed high treason, the penalty for which, as you all know, is death." Julian's knees buckled. He caught himself on the altar rail, the warrant crumpling in his white-knuckled grip. His breathing had become ragged, desperate. Clara backed away from him, her face a mask of horror as she finally understood. She hadn't married a lord with a fortune. She had married a condemned traitor. The title, the estate, the life of luxury she'd schemed for, all of it was about to vanish into a cell in the tower. "The king has been most generous," Elena said, her tone suggesting that the king's generosity was entirely at her urging. "He has granted Lord Thorne the dignity of being arrested at his wedding, surrounded by the society he so desperately sought to impress. His Majesty thought it fitting that the man who stole from the crown while pretending to be a gentleman should be exposed for what he truly is before all of London's finest families." Julian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. His eyes, wide and desperate, fixed on Elena's face as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Not the naive girl he'd courted and betrayed, but the intelligent, calculating woman who had outmaneuvered him completely. The full weight of his situation crashed over Julian like an avalanche. This wasn't a family dispute that could be settled with money or smoothed over with his charm. This wasn't a scandal that would fade after a few months of social exile. This was treason, a crime against the crown itself. The warrant Elena had delivered wasn't a negotiation or a threat. It was a death sentence wrapped in formal legal language. He would be dragged to the Tower of London, likely within the hour. There would be a trial, but only as a formality. The evidence was damning, and he had nowhere to run. The king himself had signed the warrant. Lords had been executed for less. Julian's mind raced through impossible scenarios, each more desperate than the last. Could he run? The cathedral doors were surely watched by now. Could he claim ignorance? He'd already sold half the jewels to pay his gambling debts. There were records, witnesses. Could he implicate Clara, claim she was the mastermind? One look at his bride's horrified face told him she'd turn on him instantly to save herself. There was no escape, no clever argument or social connection that could save him now. He was going to die. He was going to be taken from this cathedral in chains, imprisoned in the darkness of the tower, and then dragged before a crowd to be hanged like a common criminal. His title, his reputation, his very life, all of it ending because he'd been too greedy and too stupid to realize what he was truly stealing. The edges of his vision began to darken. The cathedral spun around him, candlelight blurring into streaks of gold against the shadows. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. He couldn't breathe. The collar of his dress uniform felt like it was strangling him. He tried to speak, to plead, to do anything, but his throat had closed completely. "Julian." Clara's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Julian, what?" His eyes rolled back in his head. The warrant slipped from his nerveless fingers. His knees gave out completely and he pitched forward, his full weight crashing into the altar steps with a sound that made several guests scream. His head cracked against the marble with a sickening thud. He lay in a heap of white and gold military splendor, metal scattered, one leg bent at an awkward angle, utterly unconscious. Clara shrieked, a sound of pure hysteria that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. She dropped her bouquet and fell to her knees beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Julian, wake up. You can't. This isn't. Someone help him." Her wedding dress pooled around his collapsed form like a white shroud. The priest stumbled backward, nearly dropping his prayer book, pressing himself against the altar as if the unconscious man might somehow contaminate him. The guests erupted into chaos, some standing and shouting, others sitting frozen in shock, several ladies fainting in their pews, requiring their companions to fan them frantically. The carefully orchestrated ceremony had dissolved into complete pandemonium. Elena stood perfectly still amid the chaos, watching it all with that same cold expression. She didn't move to help Julian. She didn't comfort her weeping sister. She simply waited, patient as death itself, for what came next. As if on cue, because of course it was on cue, Elena had planned every moment of this with military precision. The massive cathedral doors boomed open for the second time that day. The chaos in the pews instantly stilled as every head turned toward the entrance. 6 royal guards marched in formation down the center aisle, their boots striking the marble in perfect unison, a drumbeat of inevitable justice. They wore the formal uniform of the king's personal guard. Scarlet coats with gold braiding, white breeches, tall black boots polished to a mirror shine, and ceremonial sabers at their hips. The captain led them, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a face carved from granite, carrying a pair of heavy iron shackles. The congregation parted before them like the Red Sea, people pressing themselves back into the pews to let the soldiers pass. No one spoke. No one dared. The authority these men carried was absolute and terrifying. They answered only to the king, and their presence meant that royal justice had arrived. They reached the altar without breaking stride. The captain glanced down at Julian's crumpled form, still unconscious on the steps. His face pale as death, a trickle of blood running from where his head had struck the marble. The captain's expression showed neither pity nor satisfaction, only professional detachment. He nodded to 2 of his men, who bent down and hauled Julian upright with practiced efficiency, holding him under the arms as his head lolled forward. A 3rd guard produced smelling salts and waved them under Julian's nose. Julian jerked back to consciousness with a choking gasp. For a moment his eyes were unfocused, confused. Then memory and reality crashed back over him and his face crumpled in despair. "No," he whispered. "Please, no." The captain clapped the iron shackles around Julian's wrists with 2 sharp clicks that echoed through the silent cathedral. The sound had a terrible finality to it, like a coffin lid closing. The metal was heavy, old, and dark. These weren't the polite restraints used for minor offenders, but the serious irons reserved for traitors and murderers. Clara launched herself at the guards, her wedding dress tangling around her legs as she grabbed at the captain's arm. "Stop this. You can't do this. He is Lord Thorn. He is a peer of the realm. You have no right." Her voice rose to a shriek. "This is our wedding day. You cannot arrest him. I won't allow it. I am his wife and I." The captain looked at her for the first time, his gaze cold and unmoved. "My lady, you are not his wife. The ceremony was not completed. Lord Thorn remains unmarried, which means his title and estate will revert to the crown upon his execution. I suggest you concern yourself with your own future, as you are about to find yourself without prospects." He turned away from her dismissively, her grasping hands falling away from his arm. Clara made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. She whirled on Elena, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "This is your fault. You vindictive witch. You've destroyed everything. You couldn't bear to see me happy, so you—" The captain cleared his throat, cutting through Clara's tirade. He turned to Elena and executed a formal bow. His fist over his heart in the gesture of respect shown only to royalty and those acting with royal authority. "Lady Elena Ashford, your orders?" His voice carried through the cathedral, ensuring everyone heard, ensuring everyone understood exactly who held power in this moment. Elena met his gaze and inclined her head with regal grace. "Take him to the tower, Captain. The king will decide his fate in due course. Ensure he is held in accordance with the gravity of his crimes." "As you command, my lady." The captain bowed again, then gestured sharply to his men. "Move out." For guards surrounded Julian, gripping his arms and shoulders. They began marching him back down the aisle, his chains clinking with each forced step. Julian twisted his head back, his eyes finding Elena one last time. "Please," he choked out. "Elena, I'm sorry. I never meant. Please, for what we once." Elena's expression didn't change. She watched him being dragged away with the same cold detachment one might show watching furniture being removed. Julian's pleas echoed off the walls as the guards hauled him toward the doors, his expensive boots scuffing against marble, his medals jangling mockingly with each step. The cathedral doors slammed shut behind them, and Lord Julian Thorne was gone. The sound of the closing doors seemed to break whatever spell had held the congregation frozen. People erupted into frantic conversation, standing and gesturing, the scandal already spreading through the pews like wildfire. Elena could hear the whispers starting. "Did you see? The crown jewels," she said. "Treason, can you imagine? Poor Clara, what will become of—" "I always thought there was something suspicious about Lord Thorne." Elena paid them no attention. She turned slowly, deliberately, to face her sister. Clara had collapsed onto the altar steps where Julian had fainted. Her white dress spread around her like broken wings, orange blossoms from her crown scattered across the marble. Her face was blotchy with tears, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. All her smug beauty destroyed by grief and rage and dawning horror. She looked up as Elena approached, and for a moment their eyes met. Two sisters who had once played together as children, who had once shared secrets and dreams. Then Clara's face twisted with venom. "You've destroyed me," she hissed. "You've taken everything from me. My wedding, my husband, my future, everything. Are you satisfied now? Does your revenge taste sweet? Elena? You've ruined my entire life." Elena stopped 2 steps away, looking down at her sister without a trace of sympathy. "I've ruined your life?" Her voice was quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made it more cutting than if she'd shouted. "I found you in my bed with my fiancé. You conspired with him to steal my mother's dying gift to me. You mocked me, scorned me, and tried to take everything I had while I was still bleeding from the betrayal. And now you claim I've ruined you." Clara struggled to her feet, her dress catching under her heels, nearly tripping her. She stumbled forward, grabbing at Elena's black sleeves. "Elena, please. We're sisters. Blood is thicker than whatever happened between us. You can stop this. Tell the king it was a misunderstanding. Tell him Julian didn't know they were crown property. You can save him. You can save both of us. Please, I'm begging you." Her voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, genuine desperation showed through the anger. She was terrified. The reality had finally penetrated through her self-absorption. Julian was going to die or rot in prison forever, and she was about to be cast out by society, shunned as the woman who almost married a traitor. No other man would touch her now. Her father had already disinherited her for her role in betraying Elena. She had nothing, less than nothing. Elena looked at the hands clutching her sleeves, at her sister's tear-stained face, at the desperation in her eyes. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even pity. Just a cold, empty space where her love for her sister used to live. She reached up and carefully detached Clara's fingers from her dress, one by one, as if removing something distasteful. "You ceased to be my sister," Elena said quietly. "The moment you chose to betray me, you made your choice, Clara. You wanted Lord Thorn? You wanted his title and his fortune and everything you thought came with him? Well, congratulations. You have him. He's yours. Enjoy being remembered as the woman who tried to marry a traitor. Enjoy the pity and scorn that will follow you for the rest of your days. Enjoy sleeping in the bed you made." Clara's face went white, then red, then white again. "You're a monster," she whispered. "A cold-hearted monster. I hope you die alone and miserable, Elena. I hope." But Elena had already turned away. She walked down the altar steps with the same deliberate grace she'd used entering the cathedral, her black dress trailing behind her like a shadow. She didn't look back at her sister crumpled on the altar. She didn't acknowledge the stunned priest or the gaping congregation. She simply walked down the aisle, through the massive doors, and out into the afternoon sunlight. Behind her, Clara's sobs echoed through the empty cathedral, the sound of a life collapsing under the weight of its own greed and betrayal. 3 months passed like pages turning in a history book, each one recording the fall of those who had betrayed Elena and the rise of justice long delayed. Lord Julian Thorne never saw the outside of the Tower of London again. His trial lasted less than a day. The evidence was overwhelming, his guilt undeniable. The jewels he'd sold could be traced through a dozen pawnbrokers and dealers, each transaction documented, each witness eager to testify in exchange for leniency. The ones he hadn't yet sold were found in a hidden compartment in his study, wrapped in cloth stolen from Elena's own wardrobe. He'd been planning to sell them slowly, carefully, to fund his lifestyle of gambling and excess. Instead, he'd sealed his own fate. The king, perhaps showing the mercy Elena had privately begged for, commuted his sentence from execution to life imprisonment. Julian would spend the rest of his days in a cold cell, his title stripped, his name synonymous with betrayal and greed. Some said death would have been kinder. Clara's fate was, in many ways, worse. She had not been charged with any crime. She'd been foolish and cruel, but not technically criminal. But society, that elegant, merciless beast, had its own form of justice. She was shunned completely. Invitations dried up overnight. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Her father, humiliated by the scandal, refused to see her or provide her any funds. She was forced to take rooms in a shabby boarding house in an unfashionable part of the city, supporting herself by selling her jewelry piece by piece. She was known now only as the trader's almost wife, a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to their daughters about the dangers of ambition without conscience. The beautiful, spoiled girl who had once dreamed of becoming a countess now worked as a poorly paid governess, teaching other women's children, her beauty fading early from bitterness and regret. But Elena flourished like a flower finally freed from choking weeds. The king, grateful for the recovery of his late mother's jewels and impressed by Elena's loyalty and cleverness, summoned her to court. The private audience lasted an hour, during which he heard the full story of her mother's service to Queen Charlotte, of the sacred trust that had been betrayed, and of Elena's patient, calculated pursuit of justice. When she left the royal presence, she carried a new title, Lady Elena Ashford, Countess of Thornfield, with a royal estate and income to match. The king had granted her independence, power, and recognition in her own right, not as someone's daughter or potential wife, but as a woman who had proven herself worthy of royal favor. The estate at Thornfield was magnificent. Set in the rolling hills of Sussex, it comprised 300 acres of woodland and gardens, a manor house of golden stone with 27 rooms, and an income from tenant farms that would keep Elena comfortable for the rest of her life. She'd spent the past weeks overseeing renovations, selecting staff, and slowly transforming the house into a true home. For the first time in her life, she answered to no one. Her choices were her own. Her future was her own. Now, on a warm June evening, Elena stood on the second-floor balcony of Thornfield Manor, her hands resting on the stone balustrade, her face turned toward the setting sun. The sky was ablaze with color, deep gold fading to amber, streaked with rose and violet. Below her, the gardens stretched out in careful beauty, roses and lavender filling the air with their perfume. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of her groundskeeper whistling as he locked up the greenhouse for the night. She wore no black today. That phase of her life was over, buried with the lies and betrayals that had nearly destroyed her. Instead, she had chosen a gown of vibrant gold silk, cut in the latest fashion, embroidered with thread of gold in patterns of phoenixes rising from flames. The dress caught the sunset light and seemed to glow, as if she herself were made of fire and triumph. Her dark hair was dressed simply, without the severe styling she'd worn to the wedding, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a single piece of jewelry, a pendant that had been her mother's, now returned to her by the crown, a star sapphire that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes of blue and gold. Elena closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The air smelled of roses and summer grass, of freedom and possibility. She was 24 years old. She was wealthy, titled, and independent. She had no husband to obey, no father to placate, no sister to compete with. She had her mother's memory, honored and avenged. She had justice, complete and satisfying. She had a future that stretched before her like the gardens below, full of potential, waiting to be shaped by her choices alone. Some might have called her lonely, standing here by herself in this grand house. But Elena had learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was being surrounded by people who betrayed you, who used you, who saw you only as a means to an end. Solitude was this, peaceful, powerful, chosen. She was alone by choice, not by circumstance. And she liked it that way. A small smile curved her lips as she thought of Clara in her shabby rooms, of Julian in his cell, of all the people who had whispered that she would die a spinster, pitted and forgotten. They had been so wrong. She had not died. She had been reborn. The black dress had been her chrysalis, and she had emerged from it transformed. Not into someone's wife, not into someone's victim, but into herself, fully realized and free. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky darkened to deep purple. Behind her, through the open balcony doors, candlelight glowed warm and golden in her private study, where a stack of books waited, poetry, philosophy, letters from new friends she'd made at court. Tomorrow she might ride into the village, or walk through the woods, or simply read in the garden, or travel to London for the season, or do nothing at all. The choice was entirely, gloriously hers. Elena Ashford, Countess of Thornfield, turned away from the sunset and walked back into her home, leaving the darkness of her past outside where it belonged. She wore black to bury their lies, so she could finally walk into the light of her own truth. The end. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.